So, good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all, and a very warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us today for this important discussion, No Excuse for Child Labor, What the Commonwealth Must Do Next. My name is Sneh Aurora, and I'm the Director of the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, or CHRI, based in London. And for those of you less familiar with CHRI, we are an independent, nonprofit human rights organization accredited to the Commonwealth, and we work to advance human rights in the Commonwealth countries, particularly in the areas of access to justice, freedom of expression, and contemporary forms of slavery, including child labor and human trafficking. This event today is co-organized with our long-standing partners at the Commonwealth Trade Union Group, which represents more than 70 million unionists across 46 countries of the Commonwealth. And our partners today are the Commonwealth 8.7 Network, a coalition of over 100 local civil society organizations and individuals from across the globe who share a common vision to eradicate contemporary forms of slavery and human trafficking. The webinar is supported by the ILO ACTRAV, the Bureau for Workers' Activities at the International Labour Organization. So together, we are proud to host today's webinar, which is part of a year-long series of webinars under the umbrella of the Commonwealth Children's Interest Group to promote the Kigali Declaration on Children's Rights, which was adopted at the 2024 Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Samoa. So before we begin, just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available to all registered participants and to those who could not attend today's event, including due to time zone differences. So why are we here? Why are we having this dialogue on child labor now? We're here because child labor remains one of the most widespread and persistent violations of children's rights around the world. According to the latest ILO UNICEF global estimates, nearly 1 in 10 children globally is engaged in child labor. And despite some progress, it is estimated that in 2024, child labor still affects 130 million children globally, including around 54 million children in hazardous work likely to jeopardize their health, safety, or their development. It is reported that far too many children continue to toil in mines, factories, or fields, often doing hazardous work to survive. It is also expected that the world will not meet its target of eliminating child labor by 2025. We need to ensure that governments are making good on their international political commitments. Despite near universal ratification of ILO Convention 182 on the worst forms of child labor, implementation remains inconsistent. And Convention 138, which sets the minimum age for employment, still has not been ratified by 10 ILO member states, 4 of which are Commonwealth countries. So the Commonwealth cannot be silent on this issue. It must act. With 56 member states, the Commonwealth has enormous reach and potential. The adoption of the Kigali Declaration provides a renewed commitment to children's rights. But, as I said, commitments must translate into concrete action and into policies that protect children from exploitation, especially in climate-affected regions and informal economies where risks are increasing. There is an opportunity to use Commonwealth platforms such as ministerial meetings, including meetings of law ministers and education ministers, to push the development of relevant national action plans. We see the climate emergency driving families into poverty, disrupting education, and forcing children into exploitative work just to survive. We also see the flourishing of informal labor markets, a lack of labor inspections, limited access to social protection as common threads across many Commonwealth countries. And yet also there is civil society innovation, strong trade union organizing, and brave community responses pushing back against child labor every day. So this webinar is about listening to those voices and asking some serious questions. What more can the Commonwealth do? What role can its institutions, the civil society networks, and peer learning platforms play to accelerate the elimination of child labor? We are joined today by a panel of deeply experienced voices from international institutions, grassroots organizations, and the labor movement. Simon Stain, former senior advisor on fundamental principles and rights at work at the ILO. Champa Gunasekera, chairperson of the Foundation for Innovative Social Development in Sri Lanka. And Rose Amamo, which I hope she will join soon, deputy president of the ITUC in Africa. They will be in conversation with our moderator, Owen Tudor, someone who is well known to many of you. Owen is the secretary of the Commonwealth Trade Union Group, the CTUG, and was until recently Deputy General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation, the ITUC. And he brings deep experience from decades of engagement with labor rights. And of course, he also serves currently as chair of CHRI's International Board. Owen, we are delighted to have you with us today. I will now hand over to you to introduce our panelists and ask you to guide us through what I know will be a compelling conversation. Over to you.
Thanks very much indeed to SNE for taking such a role in organising this, and to Malvika, who's been working with her, who is also on the call. Can I start by saying that this is a very important point to have this discussion for the reasons that SNE said, and also because we're leading up to the Marrakesh conference early next year on ending child labour. Can I start by just a reminder to everybody that we have a Q&A button which should be at the bottom of your screen, depending on what sort of thing that you're using, and it would be very helpful if people could put any questions for the panelists as we go through the session in that Q&A box. Our panelists may be able to read it themselves, otherwise we will read it and make sure that we ask the questions for that. So let me move on to our panelists so that we can give people the maximum amount of time to talk. As SNE says, we have Simon Stain, Champa Gunasekera, and Rose Amamo, I think, is joining at the moment, but has some problems. She's in Kenya with accessing the call. I should say, by the way, that this is not a specific problem for Kenya. Champa had problems earlier this morning with power cuts, and Simon and I live in parts of the UK which are also subject to regular reductions in signal strength. So I'm hoping that we'll get through this and everyone will be able to connect. So our first speaker will be Simon Stain, who is the former senior advisor on child labour at the International Labour Organization. I've known Simon personally for many decades, and he's going to introduce us to the discussion. Simon, I think you've got some slides that contain a lot of really detailed information, and we're not expecting people to read them all immediately.
No, I won't.
But if we could have those slides, because they set out what the conventions are from the ILO on child labour and what some of the most detailed statistics are at the moment on child labour. These will also be put into the into I think the chat section and will be circulated at the end of the event to everyone who's registered. So Simon, do you want to take us through first some basic points about the conventions?
As quickly as I can. Well, the international community defines child labour in two ILO conventions, one from 1973, which is on the minimum age for entry into work or employment, and the other, which never was intended to supplement, to replace Convention 138, but to complement it and build on it, which is Convention 182 on the worst forms of child labour, which we adopted in 1999. So child labour is basically types of work for which the child is too young. Either they're simply too young to be working, so we have a minimum age for work, which should be the same age as the school leaving age. Light work may be permissible under that, but in general, we have a minimum age, 15. Some countries can at the interim can set an age of 14 if their economies and education systems are not sufficiently developed. Or if they're old enough to work that's simply unsuitable or otherwise or dangerous or otherwise unsuitable. So hazardous forms of work in particular, which SNE referred to. These are the worst forms of child labour. Work which is hazardous, forced labour, which affects somewhere between 3 and 4 million of the 138 million children in child labour. Commercial sexual exploitation, roughly similar, and illicit activities such as forced begging or involvement in drug trafficking. Now, Convention 182 has been ratified by every member state of the ILO. It's the only UN specialised agency convention that has reached universal ratification. Convention 138 on minimum age still has 10 ratifications to go. The biggest non-ratifiers are Iran and the United States. But as SNE said, we have 4 Commonwealth members, New Zealand, Tonga, Tuvalu, and the Cook Islands that haven't ratified yet. So basically, if we look at these 2 conventions, we understand that there is a group of types of activity, economic activity, that children do that they shouldn't do, either because they're too young or because the work is hazardous in other respects. But that means, of course, that not everything that children do under the age of 18 is child labour. We have a group of children 15 to 18 who may be looking for legitimate, decent work in youth employment. That's absolutely crucial to understand. It's the hazardous work, mostly for those children, that makes that not decent youth employment, but child labour. But although an awful lot of attention gets paid to that older group who are visible in hazardous work, our largest challenge is the fact that the majority of children in child labour, 57%, are aged 5 to 11, and that the child labour in this age group has increased since 2012. So we're not stopping entry of 5 to 11-year-olds into child labour. Next slide, please. Can we have the next? Yeah, good. So the statistics that the ILO and now with UNICEF publish every 4 years have been going since for 25 years, since 2000. The latest statistics show that we have 138 million children aged 5 to 17 in child labour. So there is, counterintuitively, with the pandemic and conflict, there appears to have been a reduction. 54 million of them are in hazardous work, and of course, low income, low human development index, conflict and fragility do affect and exacerbate the problem. Roughly 2/3 of all child labour is in sub-Saharan Africa, and half of that is in Commonwealth countries, which is roughly the population break. Much lower rates now in Central and South Asia and in East and Southeast Asia and in Latin America. 79 million, so 57% of all child labour is 5 to 11-year-olds. The older age groups account for the rest. But there's been a very, very tiny decline in the number of children since 2008. And actually, that's the percentage decline compared to a huge decline amongst older children. And the youngest age group's the only age group in which invisible child labour, girls and boys are equal in number. Outside the home, more boys are employed as children become older. But if you include household chores for more than 21 hours a week, which we use as a threshold for when household chores become child labour as opposed to simply helping around the home, girls outnumber boys in all age groups. But these are the key things I think we need to think about as Commonwealth activists. First of all, the absolute number in sub-Saharan Africa has increased by 50% since 2008. It's a fall in prevalence, but of course the population has increased and we have far more children. In sub-Saharan Africa, nearly 70% of all child labour is children aged 5 to 11. Over in the world altogether, 61% of child labour is in agriculture, but in sub-Saharan Africa it's 70%. And much higher amongst the youngest children. And most of that is not in global supply chains. For those of you who are global supply chain activists, of course, they matter hugely. And the behaviour of multinationals in terms of investment and tax and the provision of decent work, of course, that matters. But the vast majority of child labour in Africa is in informal own use production in small micro enterprises producing for local markets. And that's where the vast proportion of 5 to 11-year-olds start work in child labour. The largest single typology of child labour in the world is a 5 to 11-year-old child, as likely to be a girl as a boy, in unpaid work in an informal family agriculture enterprise in sub-Saharan Africa. And this is an enterprise that is unable to function without their work, but earns inadequate income to replace them with adults in decent work. We call that functional dependence. And it's the key problem that is preventing or is hindering us, our ability to turn off the tap, to stop children entering child labour. They enter at 5 to 11, they do worse forms as they get older if they stay in child labour. And this, of course, you can talk about enforcement, and for some forms it's absolutely appropriate. But if you're talking about tens of millions of families, parents who are whose children are working alongside them because they can't afford, because of the injustice in the global economy, to replace them with adults in decent paid work, this requires integrated, equitable, rights-based socioeconomic rural development, and it simply can't be resolved by enforcement mechanisms. It needs investment, infrastructure, training, support, agricultural extension, and decent access to markets and decent prices for products that small farmers grow, and decent wages for rural workers. For me, this is the absolutely crucial question for the Commonwealth. We know everybody's concerned about the really horrible stuff we see in newsreels and on the television, particularly in globally traded products. But actually, if we don't deal with the fundamental challenges of the youngest children in sub-Saharan Africa, we will never stop child labour, because it's like a stew pot. We wipe up the bit that boils over on the stove, but we're not turning off the gas, and we continue to put carrots and onions and other vegetables into the pot. We need to look at not just what is visible and mucky, but we need to lift off the pot, see where the youngest children are, turn off the gas. That's the introduction to the fundamental. And of course, most of that, or half at least of that, is in the Commonwealth in sub-Saharan Africa. It is the largest single challenge we face: rural development, justice for people living in rural areas. Thanks very much.
So Simon, in that sense, I mean, I'm assuming that that's why you're placing such great emphasis on the youngest children performing child labour in rural economies in sub-Saharan Africa. It's because that's the channel through which most child labour at the moment is being produced.
Absolutely. And if children typically start at that very young age, and then they may be doing quite dangerous work even on the family farm: pesticides, extreme heat, heavy weights that are inappropriate. And the parents don't know that it's dangerous because they haven't got adequate safety and health training. That's one of the reasons why labour inspection and agricultural extension, the work of rural workers' unions and co-ops, is so crucially important. But as they get older, typically they will do work that is increasingly hazardous. And they may then leave the family enterprise to work for other employers in other sectors. It's important to remember too that the child won't be just doing one activity. They'll be doing all sorts of activities in the rural economy. That could include, typically in South Asia, brick kilns. In West Africa, it could include typically market work or artisanal gold mining, which has now become a real challenge, particularly for Ghana, where I particularly have a connection, as you know. So yeah, absolutely. It's the entry. We are not, Kailash Satyarthi said this at the Argentina Global Conference in 2017. If we don't turn off the tap of new entry, we'll never eliminate child labour. It will go on forever.
And why do you believe rights-based rural development and community ownership of the drive towards freedom from child labour are so important in this work?
Well, I think you know that I was deeply involved with GAWU, the General Agricultural Workers Union of Ghana, and the fishing community on the Volta Lake of Tokor in developing its integrated area-based approach. And it's a brilliant example of what can be achieved when the community is involved in developing the policy. It's not being told what to do, but people actually, so experts, yes, sure, we provided expertise and some financing, but the point was we went to listen, not to tell. And we developed a model with the fishers and the women who do the fish processing in that village that enabled them to transform the way they worked so they ended their dependence on child labour. That was the key. Increasing incomes, but also providing technologies to replace child labour. This concentration on the rural economy is absolutely crucial, but it is absolutely crucial that the community and rural workers' organisations, small farmers, co-ops, as well as local public authorities are all collaborating in developing models. And even if your entry point as an activist is your horror at a worst form of child labour that touches you because there's child labour in your T-shirt or child labour in your chocolate bar, even if that's what causes you to enter into activity in the community, the integrated area rights-based approach understands that the 4 areas of fundamental rights, particularly the right to organise and bargain for decent incomes, is crucial to eliminating child labour, and that your exit point is not your conscience being salved because you no longer have cotton in your T-shirt, but it's a community that has no forms of child labour at all, and every child is now able to go to school.
So, moving on from those individual sort of what they can do, let's look at the Commonwealth. What do you think the Commonwealth specifically needs to do? And obviously, in that case, we're very often talking about the Commonwealth Secretariat and Commonwealth governments acting together.
Well, I mean, it would of course be helpful if New Zealand were to lead by ratifying Convention 138. And I understand the reasons why. They're very similar to the farming community's attitudes about how wonderful work is on farms for children in the United States, where child labour is increasing and where children get killed all the time in agricultural accidents or badly injured. But actually, when you look at it, the numbers of children who aren't covered by Convention 138 in the Commonwealth are about 1 million. 960,000 in New Zealand and about 40,000 in the Pacific Islands. So the vast majority of children are, in principle, covered by their government's commitments, treaty obligations to protect them under the conventions. Now, in terms of the follow-up, well, we have the next global conference coming up in Marrakesh in February. Very short conference, will be under great pressure. The declaration will be negotiated beforehand. There'll be an opportunity for it to explore exchanges of expertise, but the policy will be decided and be there for basically to be adopted by acclamation. In these run-up consultations in the coming weeks, it's really important that Commonwealth actors intervene and take part in the consultations so that the key priorities of rural development in the Commonwealth are on the agenda, that the voice of rural producers, small farmers, is not excluded from the consultations. The needs of the informal rural economy are heard clearly, not just by experts, but by the people who do the work in the rural economy and their organisations. And as a follow-up, I think the Commonwealth needs to look, the ILO is in a really difficult situation financially at the moment. I think if you read the papers, you know what's happening there, and there seems to be a suspension of all new activity. So the Commonwealth and all of us involved in Commonwealth activity need to think about, well, can we build and strengthen alliances? Can we find funding from other sources? What can we do to support small producers to organise and bargain for decent living, for a decent income? But I think for the Commonwealth, the regional organisations too should be looking at their other counterparts. So in sub-Saharan Africa, what are we doing with the African Union and with ECOWAS, for example? How can we build stronger platforms of cooperation? How can we make sure that we're firing on all 4 cylinders, if you like, that we are actually cooperating and using the scarce resources that we have in the most productive fashion? For me, that's a crucial role for the Commonwealth, and to advocate for the majority of the population of the Commonwealth who do not live in the global north, and particularly for that large proportion of the Commonwealth population who live in sub-Saharan Africa, many of them learning per person way less than $1 a day.
And presumably it would also be really useful for the ILO to develop regional and country-based child labour data and indicators so that we know how each individual country is doing and what their governments need to do on that?
There are, if you look on the ILO website, lots and lots of individual country reports. But one of the questions that arises every time the Big Four yearly, the quadrennial statistics or estimates are published is, well, if there's been a sudden drop, a worsening as there was in the 4 years before last, or a decrease as we've seen, then it's worth knowing that decrease has taken place. We can examine the policy mix and the economic investment that may have contributed. You can't say it's one attribution. It's extremely complex, of course, because it's about rights-based development. If we look at the 2008-2012 period, that accounts for half the reduction in child labour in the last 25 years. Extraordinary drop. And we think, but we don't know, that it coincides with the very excellent child labour-centred policies or child rights-centred policies of the UPA government in India and the first Lula government in Brazil. But we need to examine that mix to be able to make that attribution. And similarly, the 20 million that we've just seen, the reduction from 158 to 138 million, that's in Eastern and Southeast Asia. All of it almost, apart from a tiny drop elsewhere. Where is it? I have my own guess. I'm not going to say which country it is, but it's rapidly developing and it is adopting helpful policies. I think that we need to be able, as we've done with the tiny micro model of the TOCOR model, which is growing across Africa and has been adopted into Ghana's national policy, we need to know where governments and tripartite constituents in member states are getting it right and achieving these really significant advances, so we can examine how did you get it right? What can be learned from other countries, including in the Commonwealth? How can we adapt and replicate? I think it is really important that these national studies of success are made accessible for everybody in the Commonwealth and outside.
Thank you very much indeed, Simon. And I will probably come back to you towards the end of the session. I think your signal was breaking up a tiny bit there. So I'm going to go to a place where the signal is really strong from what I can see on my screen, which is Sri Lanka. Champa is an attorney at law and the chairperson of the Foundation for Innovative Social Development, FISD, based in Sri Lanka. The foundation works to protect and promote the rights of children in Sri Lanka by building community-based monitoring systems and empowering families and stakeholders to address root causes such as violence, discrimination, and poverty. Their approach combines advocacy, training, and grassroots initiatives to create safe and supportive environments for children. So, Champa, based on your experience in Sri Lanka and similar South Asian contexts, how do issues like domestic violence, gender bias, and internal trafficking affect the daily lives of children working in agriculture, domestic work, and fisheries?
Thank you, Simon. And I think in Sri Lanka and across much of South Asia, children engaged in labor in agriculture, domestic work, and fisheries are not just simply working to survive. They are navigating a web of intersecting vulnerabilities that shape every aspect of their daily lives. So from our field experience, it's clear that child labor does not occur in isolation. It is deeply entangled with domestic violence, gender-based discrimination, and internal trafficking, each compounding the other to create cycles of exploitation that are difficult for children to escape. At the same time, if we take Sri Lanka's plantation communities, for example, girls are often pulled out of school, not because they lack ability to study, but because they are expected to care for their siblings or to contribute to household income through informal labor. So in these same households where domestic violence is normalized and reporting mechanisms are weak, girls face heightened risks of coercion, and sexual exploitation. Their labor is not just undervalued, but it is invisibilized. We've documented cases of internal migration, where children are sent from rural districts to urban centers under the promise of education or employment. Instead, they end up in exploitative domestic work arrangements, isolated, undocumented, and beyond the reach of labor inspectors. So these children are actually hidden in plain sight, especially in informal sectors where oversight is minimal and abuse is rarely reported. Survivor testimonies gathered through FISD's direct service work reveals the emotional toll of this exploitation. One of the youth peer supporters shared how she began working in the fisheries sector at the age of 12, facing physical hardships, harassment, and isolation. So today she helps other children build resilience and access the services. But her story is, I think, a stark reminder of how trauma, stigma, and lack of alternatives keep children trapped. So these lived realities, I think, demand a fundamental shift in how we understand and address child labor. It is not merely an economic issue, in my view. It is, I think, a protection crisis rooted in structural inequality. So I believe our response must be survivor-centered, trauma-informed, and community-led. Children must not only be rescued, but they must be supported to heal, learn, and thrive.
Thanks very much, Chamba. And in terms of your foundation's community work that you were beginning to talk about there, what can we learn about tackling challenges like school dropout, weak labour monitoring, and the lack of attention to child labour in policies?
Actually, we do have many community interventions, but I would like to highlight one particular very successful intervention, particularly what we did in the plantation areas through an innovative called Kirana Kadiroli, which means sun is shining or rays of sun, which offers a powerful blueprint for addressing structural and social drivers of child labor in Sri Lanka and in similar South Asian contexts. At its core, this work operationalizes key principles of the CRC and the WHO's INSPIRE frameworks. So we all know that Article 12 of the CRC affirms children's right to be heard in all matters affecting them, and FISD's youth peer supporters embody this by lending resilience building initiatives and surfacing lived experience of child labor, internal trafficking, and school dropouts. The Kirana Kadiroli was a youth empowerment program. We actually mobilized groups of youth aged from 14 to 19 who were equipped with soft skills, critical thinking, self-care, financial literacy, and goal-setting tools, not just to resist exploitation, but to reimagine their future beyond labor. Because what we saw was whenever they came out of schools, dropped out of schools, they went into labor in different contexts. So this was kind of a a platform for them to reimagine, redefine their futures beyond any labor initiative that they would be dragged into. So these workshops actually held in 3 districts of Sri Lanka, which created safe spaces for youth to reflect on their vulnerabilities and rights. Most importantly, in this project, we also engage community adults, helping them recognize their role in preventing child labor and fostering safer environments for youth specifically. So this dual generation approach was the key to our intervention, the success to our intervention actually. Adults reported improved household communication and youth engagement in more productive activities, and youth participated in the program described personal growth and increased confidence, which clearly indicates that prevention and reintegration must be community rooted. So, in areas where labor inspections are weak or absent, FISD's grassroots evidence became a critical accountability tool. It aligns with the INSPIRE pillar on implementation and enforcement of law. So, especially when formal systems fail, when formal systems fail to detect or respond to exploitation. So, for example, about 2 years ago, FISD's advocacy brief documented child labor in the plantation sector despite official denial. The Labor Department officials who came to the launch said, there is no labor as such, child labor as such in Sri Lanka. But we had 17 case stories documented to be presented at that launch. So that evidence actually grounded in community testimonies, challenged harmful narratives, and supported INSPIRE's emphasis on norms and values. Kirana Kadiroli also confirmed that what literature and field practice have long shown, peers are the first line of defense. So youth were most comfortable reaching out to friends, which is why the project initiated peer supporting groups actually. So these groups strengthened through team building and communication modules, became safe havens for the youth for advice, empathy, and early intervention. Further, by bringing this evidence into national policy forums, FISD is not only amplifying voices, it is also fulfilling CRC obligations to protect children from economic exploitation and ensure recovery and reintegration. The approach is survivor-centered, community-informed, and globally aligned. Because what we believe is real reform must be rooted in lived experience and not just legal frameworks. So ultimately, Kirana Kadiroli proved itself to be more than a project. It was a persevering ray against community vulnerability, demonstrating that when youth are empowered and adults are engaged, child labor can be prevented, challenged, and replaced with pathways to dignity and opportunity.
And that's great news there. And although obviously, as a trade unionist, I would not, under any circumstances, want to undermine the work of the labor inspectors by replacing them with others. But where they're not producing that information, then I think that the point you make about the community coming forward with that information is absolutely vital. What in terms of that sun is shining approach. Have you got any advice or key advice to those who want to adapt and replicate that approach in addressing child labour in different countries, in other countries?
Yeah, I think the key lessons for replication would be survivor-centered design, which is a non-negotiable factor. Youth-led facilitation and survivor-informed content actually ensures dignity, relevance, and the trust. So reintegration also should be framed not just as rescue, but as healing and empowerment. Involving survivors in program design, delivery, and evaluation is a must. Their insights are essential for ethical and effective replication. That is one. Then for peer support is, as I said, the first line of defense. Youth are most likely to, disclose vulnerabilities to trusted peers. So establishing peer support groups with training in communication, empathy, and critical thinking creates, I think, safe, informal networks for early intervention, which is very important. These groups can detect actually school dropouts, risky migration, and exploitative work before formal systems do, because they are within the community, so they can act very fast. So what I would say is, if this is to be replicated, take a step forward, which we have not done yet, but thinking as a second step in our intervention, embed peer support modules into school clubs or child clubs, youth centers, and community-based child protection mechanisms. Also, it is another important aspect is the dual generation engagement, which strengthens the impact. I think Kirana Kadiroli, the inclusion of both youth and adults fostered mutual understanding and accountability. And adults actually, as I mentioned, they said the youth were more freely communicating at home rather than early, because we see that youth are to themselves mostly, and a little distant from their parents. But here, after the intervention, this result was reported. So design intergenerational workshops that build shared responsibility for child protection, especially in the high-risk districts. And these shouldn't be one-off interventions, actually. It should, have follow-up sessions, looking at what results are generated from one workshop to another. I think building soft skills also for resilience and providing alternatives. I think modules of self-care, financial literacy, goal setting, we actually have done some of those. And this actually helped youth to envision futures, as I said, beyond labor. Because in Sri Lanka, the children, as they come out of school, they want to become three-wheeler drivers, not wanting to do any other job. And we see that small towns are, flooded with three-wheelers, no hires, because there are so many three-wheelers waiting for hires. And children, they don't look beyond, labor situation. So this made a bit, gave them a bit different scenario to think beyond that. So maybe integrate soft skills into vocational training, alternative education, and intergeneration programs should be part of this. Another, I think, would be community evidence for policy change. So what we have done is we have documented the child labor prevalence in the plantation sectors, and we can train local facilitators to collect and present evidence ethically, aligning with the CRC Article 12, and also inspires pillar on norms and values. Because what I believe is community is the best target group to do this work, rather than anyone going from outside and trying to gather evidence. The community will know what exactly prevails in their own community. So we only need to facilitate them to understand what real data collection methods are, evidence, how to collect it properly. And of course, we have done this, so I will recommend it to anyone else also, the languages and cultural relevance, which matters quite a lot. Any material that is done in now in Sri Lanka, we have 2 local languages, so we've done that in both languages. And I think that kind of gives the activity more relevant to the communities.
Champa,
I
will
think
come back
those
to
would
you.
be the ones that I would
Sure.
recommend.
Thank you very much. All excellent advice. Can I'll come back to you, Champa, later on, but I think we have
Sure.
now actually been joined by Rose. So I think we've got Rose, if you're available, Rose, now. Can I introduce Rose, who is an old colleague from the trade union? Well, she's not old. I'm old. Rose is one of our rising stars in the trade union movement. She is now Deputy President of the International Trade Union Confederation for Africa. Representing 17 million members in 52 countries, many of those that Simon identified earlier as having particular problems with child labour. She is a board member of the Central Organisation of Trade Unions in Kenya, the National Trade Union Organisation, and is General Secretary of the Amalgamated Union of Kenya Metal Workers, the first woman to hold that role, having risen from the shop floor in that. She's represented workers on Kenya's National Social Security Fund Board since 2022 and played a role in organising 5,600 informal workers in a campaign in 2019. Internationally, she's been a strong voice in discussions on an ILO convention that I think we haven't mentioned yet, 190, on violence and harassment at work. So, Rose, we're really, really glad that you've been able to join us. From a trade union perspective, how can strengthening workers' rights and organising the informal sector, as you've done, help to address the root causes of child labour, particularly the invisible exploitation of girls in domestic and care work?
Thank you, Owen, and thank you for inviting me to this webinar. It is a very important discussion for us. And for us in the labor movement, let me just say an opening remark that child labor is not just a violation of rights. It's the clearest sign of inequality and failed protections for working families. Because when adults earn poverty wages, when social protection is weak, and when crisis hit, it is children who pay the price of leaving the school to go and work. So the answer here, Owen, is very simple. The reality is really very simple. When adults have decent work, children are free to learn. Trade unions address child labor at its roots by fighting for living wages, social protection, and safe workplaces. This reduces the pressure on families to rely on their children for survival. And so we are also organizing workers in the informal sector. We organize the street vendors, domestic workers, small-scale farmers, because this is where child labor is most concentrated and least regulated. So by empowering these workers, we can raise awareness in communities and prevent children from being pushed into labor.
That's brilliant, and I think in particular one of the things that the African trade union movement is well known for is making that doing that work in the informal sector. Rose, I think we're losing you a tiny bit in that, but I wonder, can I explore with you the issue of climate change and the impact of that on working families in Africa, and what role can trade unions play in building resilience to ensure that climate change doesn't have that sort of impact? Can you hear me? I think we may have lost Rose, so we may.
No,
Yeah. You're back.
Did you lose me, Owen?
We did a bit, yeah. No, I was just asking you about if you could explore the issue of the impact of climate change on working families in Africa and what role trade unions can play in tackling that.
Yeah, thank you, Owen. Thank you very much. And I want to say that, can you hear me well?
Now?
Yeah,
we can now.
Yes, climate change is not only an environmental crisis. It is a labor crisis. Maybe I should hold my phone closer to me so that you cannot miss me. I am saying that climate change is not only an environmental crisis, it is a labor crisis.
Rose, we've lost you again. I wonder if you could turn off your video and whether that would give you more bandwidth. Rose, can you turn off your video? No, I think we're losing that. I'm very sorry about that. We'll try and get Rosa in later on in the discussion. Can I turn a little bit to some questions that we've already had in the chat? Sorry, Rose, you're back.
Yes. Did you hear me? I was giving you an example of Mozambique and Malawi. Can you hear me?
No, go ahead now. Yeah.
Yes, telling you how repeated cyclones and floods have displaced families in Mozambique and in Malawi. And I am saying that parents are struggling to rebuild livelihoods because children are drawn into casual labor in construction, in agriculture, or domestic work to support these families. So you find that in regards to that, trade unions are responding by pushing for just transition policies, green jobs, income support, and resilience measures that protect workers and keep children in school. Because we do believe that protecting adult workers in climate-affected regions is directly protecting children from exploitation. So I just want to make it clear here that most of our boys, due to climate change, they are pushed into herding. Some of them are farming. Some of them are street vendors. And looking at girls, girls are pulled out of school to fetch water or take care of their siblings. And these are the effects of climate change that is not only an environmental crisis, but it's also a labor crisis. And it is also driving child labor in Africa.
Thanks very much indeed for that, Rose, and thanks for persevering with the discussion. Can I just look at the Q&A set questions and remind people who are on the call to put their questions for panelists into the Q&A. One of the questions in there at the moment that I'm going to address not so much to a panelist but more to one of our conveners today is the question about from Dosavi Samabe, which says, given the challenges related to children's rights, the harsh labor of children and early marriage or sexual activity in sub-Saharan Africa, how does CHRI, and I think possibly this is more about the 8.7 Commonwealth 8.7 network, support its member organizations in raising awareness and promoting children's rights to better protect them? Sneh, are you able to handle that one?
Yes, sure, Owen. Yes, thank you, Dosavi, for your question. So you may have heard of our network. So the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, we had founded the Commonwealth 8.7 Network, which is a civil society coalition of, I think, approximately 117 local and regional anti-slavery organizations that are working to end contemporary forms of slavery, including trafficking and child labor, across the Commonwealth. We have 56 members from the Africa region. And we founded this coalition in 2019. So as the network's founder and secretariat, we facilitate regional sharing and exchange, regional collaboration, advocacy, and survivor-centered strategies to raise awareness and influence national and international policy. For example, we work closely with our network members in the various regions to amplify grassroots voices, to share data, to share good practice, and to build capacity on various issues. For example, to engage effectively with governments and with UN human rights mechanisms. So we support civil society submissions to the UN Human Rights Council, to the special rapporteurs on the development of their reports, and other and other Commonwealth platforms like the Commonwealth Heads of Government meetings. So we bring issues that are relevant to our members to those platforms to ensure that children's rights, including protection from child labor, early marriage, sexual exploitation, and other issues related to contemporary forms of slavery are prioritized in law and in practice.
Thanks very much indeed, Sneh. Simon, there was something that Rose said that prompted you to want to come back. I'm perfectly happy to moderate a discussion as well as a Q&A session. But Simon, I also have a job for you before you make that remark. Kolawole in the Q&A session has identified that there are countries which have got specific data on what's going on in their countries. And because he gives the example of Nigeria's National Child Labour Survey, and he asks, how can the Commonwealth support members that have that specific data in the area of implementation? So in other words, what should individual governments do, and once they know some of the data about their own country, and how can the Commonwealth help? But you were also going to respond to Rose as well.
Yeah. So first on Kolawole's question. Look, sorry, maybe I wasn't. I obviously wasn't very clear. The data that the ILO uses for the estimates is a huge collection of household surveys, and the latest covered countries that had, I think, 80% of the world's child population. So they're really statistically valid. It's not that countries don't have their own national child labour statistics. It's that when we see these overall global trends, we're not always able to identify from them which countries have made the most progress, for whatever reason, and therefore to examine why that progress has been made and whether the rest of us can learn good lessons from those examples. I mentioned earlier the extraordinary progress in the 2008-2012 period that we think was due primarily to the UPA alliance government in India and the Lula government and its partners in Brazil. But we need to do the research. So we have almost everywhere some form of child labour survey or household survey. And I think that one of the points that was made earlier by Champa actually is that we don't always have, there's nowhere in the world that has adequate labour inspection presence. It just doesn't exist. It's the poor relation of the poor relation, which is the Labour Ministry. So we need to bring together labour inspectors, agricultural extension officers, community child labour monitoring schemes with national statistical services, so that we can not just create national statistics, but also know what's going on at the community level. So the community-based child labour monitoring systems, which unions can play a really important part in, co-ops, so very, very important. So the point I wanted to add, Rose made two really, really crucial points, and about rural to urban migration, which is in part being accelerated by the climate crisis, and what it results in many communities is a labour force left behind in the village that is mainly composed of older people and younger children. So the younger workers are simply leaving. That's partly because small agriculture in the village is not providing enough opportunities for decent work and a decent future. So they are indeed, as Rose said, moving into urban centres, into the urban informal economy. There's a limit to how many tuk-tuk drivers and street hairdressers and mobile phone repairers the informal economy can support. So this is about an interwoven national policy for sustainable economic development and equitable development. But it starts with the fundamental conundrum: how much of the world can live in cities and how little of the world can live in the rural areas. It's clear that we can't all live in cities because we need rural workers and farmers to feed us. So we need thriving rural communities which provide attractive futures for young workers. That's really crucial. And she made another point, which is prosaic but absolutely central. And that's about the amount of time that girl children in particular spend in rural communities fetching water when there is no clean water available directly in the village. So there are really quite straightforward, if you call them intermediate technology, infrastructure additions that can be supported. WaterAid does it, for example, bringing clean water to a village. A clean standpipe with a sufficient supply reduces hugely the amount of child labour being done by girl children who spend hours fetching water. That's a really simple example of and another one, which is to do with, again, with the rights of girl children to access school. Very often we see, and it's to do with water and sanitation, girls are often withdrawn from school when they reach puberty because there are no separate latrines for boys and girls in many schools. It's as simple as that. And if they are protected at school and there are decent facilities at school, they are more likely. So they were just two what the previous speakers have said, but I think the most important is to understand that in many rural areas, the population spread is really changing. So we have older people and younger children, and the younger worker age group are leaving the countryside. That's one of the reasons why probably we've seen a reduction in the number and the percentage of children in child labour in agriculture, because the older children are leaving the village. And I think that's a really important point to make. This is about climate and conflict. This is created by competition for resources as a result of climate. That can also be. The other thing that's happening is that because of the lack of sustainability of agricultural income, in some parts of the world, not least in Ghana, farmers are turning from from farming to artisanal and small-scale mining, and are digging up their land in the hope of finding gold. And that's becoming widespread. It's not just Ghana. We see it in Zimbabwe. We see it in other countries. So we have this increasing small-scale mining presence in what were previously primarily agricultural communities. That's just, I mean, it's also important to understand. And children are then being drawn into that. Highly hazardous work. Highly hazardous. Thanks.
And we also see young people being involved in things like litter picking and industries like that, which are sort of, you know, very often the outskirts of cities and villages and so on.
We supported in Pakistan. We supported the development of litter pickers co-ops to try and help them. So this is still the informal economy, but as Rose says, the importance of supporting the informal economy workers to organise so they have a voice, not just a voice with public authorities about their ability to work without harassment and so on, but their ability to bargain simply for a better price for what they've produced. These are crucial. This is a form of collective bargaining that doesn't look like an agreement at Mercedes-Benz or Ford, but it's really, really crucial. And it expresses a fundamental right expressed in the 1998 ILO Declaration of Fundamental Rights. That the purpose of the fundamental rights is to enable people to bargain for a fair share of wealth they've helped to create. And it's the fact they don't get a fair share that is driving child labour almost everywhere.
Right. So, Simon, I asked you this question earlier, but I'm going to now put it to Rose and Champa, and I'm going to put it to Rose first, and then if the connection collapses, we'll go straight on to Champa. But let's give it a go, Rosa. What do you think we should be asking the Commonwealth and Commonwealth governments to do as a Commonwealth? So not what, as Simon said earlier, what the individual governments should do in their countries, but what should we be asking the Commonwealth itself to do? Rose first.
Owen, three things for me we should ask Commonwealth to do. The first thing is that Commonwealth should make sure that there is concrete actions on making sure that Convention number 138 on minimum age is ratified by all Commonwealth countries, because it is a requirement, and it is, I can say, it is what we need to truly advocate for first. And that is what Commonwealth should do. The second thing is to invest in strong labor inspection systems that can reach rural and informal sectors, making sure that the inspection or the inspectorate systems that are there can reach those rural and informal sectors, because that is where the biggest violations of children's rights and child labor is realized. And also the third is that we need to guarantee that we get out of these conferences, these talks, into concrete action. And the concrete action should be no child should work and every child must learn. This is something that Commonwealth can coordinate, can communicate, and make sure that Commonwealth countries are there to that. Because if we deceive ourselves here that by having these workshops, child labor will be abolished. That is not the case. We've had all these workshops, we have been these webinars, but what concrete action is Commonwealth taking to make sure that no child should work and every child must learn? These three things, Owen, stand for me. And if Commonwealth can do this, I can tell you for sure that trade unions are ready to partner, to organize, and to hold the line.
Absolutely.
Because
Thanks
child labor
yep.
is not inevitable. It is a choice that societies make when they fail to protect their workers and their children.
Indeed.
And today,
Rose.
together, we must choose definitely to come out with this declaration. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I think that the International Trade Union Confederation has made its rallying call that a world without child labour is possible, and together we must make it a reality. Champa, let's come to you. What do you think the Commonwealth ought to be doing?
Yeah, I think we need some national interventions, and in that I feel that providing technical support and peer learning for national child labor elimination strategies, that would be very vital for us to work on work with our communities. And then I would go for funding community-based monitoring systems and supporting survivors. Because what we saw was in the absence of data, the community-based monitoring becomes very vital. So for that, I think the Commonwealth can fund such community monitoring systems. For another ask from Commonwealth, I think to promote the participation of survivors and local CSOs in regional and policy platforms would be very important, because the voices of the survivors should be elevated to community, Commonwealth platforms. So those would be my asks from the Commonwealth.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed, Champa. And if we can get the Commonwealth to do those things, I think we'll be well on the way. There is, as people will know, because I've referred to it already, there is a Q&A box. So if you want to put questions in there for the panelists, then we will come to them. I often, when chairing these sort of sessions, say that it is for questions, not for statements. And then I suggest to people that if they've got a statement that they want to make and they want to put it in the form of a question, they should say at the end of it, do you agree? So there is a remark from Caroline. I hope you don't mind me characterizing it in that way, Caroline, but there is a comment from Caroline in there that a key driver of child labour is low socioeconomic development and rural poverty, and addressing that would go a long way, especially in Africa, alongside strong labour enforcement, as we've discussed. And if I add to that statement, do you agree? I think probably the panelists will all agree. I noticed Simon nodding, certainly. So there is that. So we've got some thoughts from the panelists about what the Commonwealth ought to be doing in this circumstance. We might be able to end the webinar a tiny bit early, but I had some concluding remarks to make, but before I do that, I want to come back to our panelists and ask you two questions. And these are going to be really difficult ones. You may be familiar with the lift conversation. If you were in a lift with a Commonwealth head of government or the Commonwealth Secretary General, and you had just 60 seconds between, I don't know, floor 2 and floor 3 or in some of the advanced lifts in New York skyscrapers, floor 2 and floor 20, which could still be achieved in 60 seconds. What would you advise a Commonwealth head of government or the Commonwealth Secretary General to prioritize next to end child labour? So you've got a 60-second challenge there. Champa looks like she's champing at the bit, so I'm going to give Champa the first go at that.
I think it's a difficult question for me to answer in 60 seconds. So let me think a little bit, and you may go to another panelist.
All right. Simon, you've got 60 seconds with the head of government.
Right, okay. Younger children in sub-Saharan Africa are the absolute priority. We have to prevent entry of children into child labour if we're ever going to end it. It's absolutely crucial, therefore, the voice of rural workers and small producers organisations and co-ops are involved in policy making, including into the run-up to the Marrakesh conference. And out of the Marrakesh conference, we need an effective platform for better cooperation in agriculture. And finally, I'd say, and I've heard it from parliamentarians from South Asia, we need to call out those governments in the Commonwealth in the global north who are using the discourse about trafficking to argue for anti-migration and anti-refugee policies. This is an absolute abuse of a human rights discussion which should protect, and it's being used by xenophobic policy in the north to justify for electoral gain. I feel very strongly, I've heard that from South Asian parliamentarians, how much distrust there is. It really needs to stop. Trafficking needs to be combated, but you don't combat it by denying the right of refugees to seek asylum. Thanks very much.
Just over 60 seconds, but maybe the lift got stuck on the way. So, Rose, what's your 60-second challenge to a Commonwealth head of government?
Yes, it's a very tough question, but one thing that I would wish, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, one thing that I would maybe tell the government is, one, to point to them that the Commonwealth has the youngest population in the world. But in that Commonwealth, millions of children and some youths are still in child labor and informal work. And so my ask would be to ask them to invest collectively in decent work for youth through skills for the future, and maybe stronger labor protections and scaling social protection to all. And because I do know that if Commonwealth leads, we can show how economic growth and dignity at work go hand in hand. Otherwise, it's very difficult. The cost of inaction is lost generations. That's what I would say. And the return on action is shared prosperity.
Fantastic, Rose. Champa.
Yeah, I will ask a very simple ask from the Commonwealth head. I would say that to institutionalize community consultations before Commonwealth policy decisions, especially on child rights and child labor. So that will be my 60 seconds ask to institutionalize the community consultations before any declarations or policy decisions are done.
Fantastic. Well under 60 seconds. Well done. Unfortunately, you've therefore allowed the Commonwealth head of government to come back at you on the subject. So final point before we start wrapping up this session. We've talked a lot about the terrible situation that young people, children are in, and very often their parents as well, and the people around them. But is there anything, a concrete example of something that's happening? Champa mentioned earlier the Sun is Shining initiative. Can you give concrete examples? Just one thing that gives you hope that child labour can be addressed effectively. Rose, do you have a message of hope?
A message of hope is that maybe just as a parting shot, which I would call a message of hope, is to say that if we are serious about ending child labor, then we must be serious about ensuring decent work for adults, because a parent with a fair wage will not leave their children to go and look for work. So the hope that I can say is that we must be serious about ensuring decent work for adults. And with that, we cannot have child labor at all, at all.
Absolutely. Simon, have you got an example of something that makes you think this can be dealt with?
Well, I said earlier, I think that if we look back at the extraordinary progress made in Brazil and under the UPA administration in India, this integration of promotion of decent work and respect for freedom of association and collective bargaining, understanding that the social wage of public services and social protection is important and just cash incomes, child protection systems and education, bringing them together in holistic, sustainable socioeconomic development policies that put the child and the rights of the child and decent work at the centre of development. We know it works, we've seen it. And that's the big macro level. At the micro level, I'd say have a look at what community-driven, union-led, cooperative-led core model in Ghana is famous throughout the African region, certainly, and Ghana officials have trained many unions on it across the region. We have excellent examples of what can be done, but at the root of it is the understanding that you need, as Rose said, decent work to make child labour not just partly to make it unnecessary, but also to ensure that incomes are there. We have circumstances where it's not just about income. If you run a farm that is so lacking in viability that you can't afford to pay anybody else, it doesn't matter really if you get a social protection payment or if the child has a free school place. If you can't run the farm without the child's work, you need an income that enables you, and that is crucial. And that's about equitable distribution of wealth in value chains, not just global, but local as well. So it's about a much bigger picture of global socioeconomic justice, political will, but when it's driven by communities, as Champa and Rose have both said, you get unstoppable progress. And you get examples that have echoes across the region and beyond. So long live the Tokor model is what I say as the village's development chief.
And Champa, you've already mentioned the Sun is Shining initiative, but is there any other example of something that's happened that gives you hope that we can eradicate child labour once and for all?
What I could say is, as I mentioned earlier, I believe that child labor is, it's a child protection crisis. So if we have a holistic approach to child protection, and I believe that we could, save children from getting into child labor. An example from our work once again is that we have child protection committees mobilized in communities. So they look after the interest of children, the rights violations in the community itself. So this is once again a child-adult participation in protecting the children. in this exercise, actually, we parallelly educate the Child Protection Committee members as to how they could, look at actually be as watchdogs for any violations of child rights. And parallelly, we have child clubs where we, take children through a kind of a developmental procedure so that we will, keep them intact in their developmental areas. So we have actually successful stories in our villages when we have this holistic approach. So I would say that I will reiterate that this is a child protection crisis.
Great. Thank you very much, Champa.
Owen, can you give me
Rose,
just 1 or 2 minutes to share with you something that we did when we were campaigning for elimination of child labor at Kotu? Our head office is at the biggest informal sector here in Kenya, the biggest informal sector market here. And we decided to make a banner and put it at the main entrance of our headquarters, which is Kotu headquarters. And the banner read, I want to read it to you. The banner read, no child should carry the weight of work on their shoulders when they should carry books in their hands. And so what we used to do, every parent that passes would read that. And then there are these children who are hawking, they are helping the parents. Then we would look for them, speak to them, trace their parents, and help them to join government schools, which has no proper school fees to pay. We would maybe make them a desk and they join the school, maybe buy a uniform and they join the school. That is why today you would find that Kenya is at 8.5 when you look at the statistics of child labor, because we did a lot of work as trade unions to make sure that we engage the government, but also the campaign that we had, the no child should carry the weight of work on their shoulders when they should be carrying books in their hands, really helped, and it has been there for many years. I just wanted to share that because there are things that we can do to eliminate child labor. Thank you.
Fantastic, Rose. Thank you very much for wrapping it up on that basis. Just to make some closing remarks, I think the key takeaways from the discussion that we've had this afternoon, which has been very very rich and very useful, is that I mean, as Caroline said in the Q&A, structural inequality, climate change, lack of decent work, poverty, gender-based violence are fueling child labour. And there's no excuse for continued inaction by the Commonwealth or governments, especially in those countries that have not yet even ratified ILO Convention 138, although implementation is obviously the most important point. The action points, I think, for the Commonwealth that come through from today's webinar are that the Commonwealth needs to help get the last few countries over the line in ratifying ILO Convention 138 so that it can join Convention 182 as a universally ratified convention, and then help them to implement those conventions, because that's actually far more important than the ratification itself, vital though that is. I think we've said that the Commonwealth needs to develop and help its member states to adopt national action plans on child labour within the context of the Sustainable Development Goals, and in particular 8.7. We need to support survivor-led advocacy and rights-based approaches, including trade unions and wider community organisations. I think that came through very strongly from everybody who spoke about how important it is to create those, to sustain those organisations that are operating in the field, in communities, and give them a platform But then also use the Commonwealth's peer learning platforms, education, labour, justice ministries, to exchange and scale the good practice that exists, some of which we've heard about today, and finally to integrate child labour into Commonwealth commitments on climate change, education, trade, and so on. I'd like to thank everybody who participate, the people who in front of you did the hardest public work, our panelists, Champa, Rose and Simon, but also those people who did the hard work behind the scenes, in particular Sneh and Malvika in the CHRI office. We will be circulating a recording of the webinar to everyone who participated, along with Simon's slides, just in case any of you didn't take them on board immediately from flashing that detail up, and with some more information. And we're going to ask everybody who's still on the call at the moment to respond to a quick 1-minute poll about the webinar event that will appear on your screens as soon as Malvika can put that up. And as she does that, I will simply say one more thank you to our sponsors, ILO ACTRAV, to the organisations involved, CHRI, CTUG and the Commonwealth 8.7 network, and to thank everybody who took part either on screen or in the audience for this poll. So if you could complete that poll. I should say, by the way, that the panelists aren't allowed to answer these questions. You can't score your own homework. So if everybody else could complete that poll and take with us our thanks for all your participation in today's events. Sneh, have you got any final words while people complete that poll?
Just a big thank you to all of our panelists, our participants, and to Owen for effectively managing and moderating this panel despite all the technical difficulties that we've had. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. And Malvika, close
the
meeting. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Hope to see you in Marrakesh. Bye.
Yeah.